this recording we'll discuss the menstrual cycle. The very first menstruation that a female experiences occurs approximately around 12 years of age and is known as menarche. This whole process starts because the hypothalamus begins secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. Okay, so that's kind of the trigger for the whole process. As a female ages, menstruation becomes erratic. Okay, estrogen productions decline. Menstruation also becomes shorter. Ovulation and menstruation will eventually just stop altogether, but this process of becoming more erratic, levels kind of declining, things like that, this is known as climacteric. Okay? Once a female experiences no menstrual periods for an entire year, they have officially entered menopause. This typically starts around ages somewhere between 46 and 54 years of age. In addition to the cessation of the menstrual period, estrogen levels will drop. Females will experience irritability and or depression. Those can set in. Hot flashes can occur, skin thinning occurs, bone mass decreases are experienced. So there's lots of other side effects to menstruation besides just no more periods. So the menstrual cycle itself is a cyclical change experienced by the endometrium. These changes are basically in response to the changing in estrogen and progesterone levels throughout a 28-day period, which is typically how long a cycle lasts. Ovulation tends to occur right around day 14, so right in the middle. We break the cycle into 3 different phases. We've got the menstruation phase, the proliferative phase, and the secretory phase. So, first things first, the menstrual phase, days 1 through 5. During the menstrual phase, you are going to experience menstruation, which is the shedding of the stratum functionalis and the blood associated with that from the uterus itself. The uterine lining will also be shed because of the low levels of estrogen and progesterone that are being experienced during these 5 days. Once menstruation finishes, we move into the proliferative phase, days 6 through 14 approximately. Since we just shed our stratum functionalis, we're going to need to generate a new one. This new stratum functionalis is generated from the stratum basalis. Okay. So the functionalis begins to thicken. Okay. And this whole process is stimulated by estrogen production in the growing follicles. Now, the endometrium during this time will double in thickness, and it will also increase vascularization, so we'll grow new blood vessels. The secondary follicles within the ovaries some of them will develop into Graafian follicles. And Graafian follicles will kind of push their way up towards the ovary surface, and eventually one of these will kind of bust open, and that will lead to ovulation. Okay. High levels of estrogen work through positive feedback, and they are working on the anterior pituitary gland to increase production of LH, okay, so luteinizing hormone, around day 14. Okay. So around day 14, all of this extra LH, it leads to what's called the surge, LH surge. Okay. That extra spike of LH on day 14 is what causes the Graafian follicle to bust open, and the secondary oocyte will enter into the fallopian tube. That is ovulation. That's how it works. In addition to all of that exciting stuff going on with the follicle, basal body temperature also goes up 0.5 degree. Cervical mucus becomes thinner, making it easier for sperm to make their way up into the uterus and then the fallopian tubes. And some females even experience twinges of abdominal pain from the ovaries stretching and stuff during ovulation. And then we have the secretory phase, days 15 through 28. Okay? So now that the graphene follicle has ruptured, it degenerates into the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is now responsible for secreting estrogens and progesterones because we still have secretion of LH. Okay. The rising levels of the progesterone are helping to prepare the endometrium for a potential fertilized ovum. Okay. Basically, the body has to assume that fertilization has taken place. The endometrium has to be prepared to accept a fertilized egg. Okay. You will also experience increased vascularization and activity of the uterine glands during this time as well. The progesterone is going to cause the cervical mucus to become thick again, and it will actually form a cervical plug, which will completely block the addition of any additional sperm from making its way up the uterus into the fallopian tubes. So at this point, if the sperm are not already in the female reproductive tract, then fertilization wouldn't be able to happen because sperm would be blocked by this cervical plug at this point. And this is what it all kind of looks like. So the menstrual phase, okay, we've shed the functionalis layer. Okay, again, day 1 through 5. Once we finish day 6 through 14, we are proliferating. We are growing a new functionalis layer. Okay. Ovulation occurs at day 14. We're going to have to continue preparing the endometrium. So notice the thickening continues. Vascularization has greatly increased. And then we've got the endometrial glands that are secreting all of that mucus to create that mucus plug. So again, if by this time sperm haven't already entered into the female reproductive tract, it's not going to happen. Okay, which we've already learned that a secondary oocyte is only viable for about 24 hours, and so by day 16-ish. If fertilization hasn't happened, it's not going to happen that month. Now, at the end of day 28, if fertilization has not happened, then we would start the menstrual phase all over again. So, if the oocyte is not fertilized, as we just mentioned, declining levels of luteinizing hormone cause the corpus luteum to continue to degenerate. Remember, your corpus luteum was secreting estrogens and progesterones, so those levels would decrease as well. The stratum functionalis would deteriorate due to the declining levels of estrogen and progesterone, and so we would begin menstruation. We would begin day 1 all over again. The anterior pituitary is no longer inhibited by the higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, so it starts secreting FSH in a new follicle in preparation for ovulation for this next month. If the oocyte is fertilized, a sperm would have entered the vagina near ovulation. Okay, within an hour, they can swim up the vagina, through the uterus into the fallopian tubes, which, remember, that's where fertilization should be occurring. They release enzymes that begin to digest the outer covering of the secondary oocyte, and they will basically bore their way into the egg. When one sperm penetrates the oocyte, that's it. Everything shuts down for the other sperm. No other sperm will be able to penetrate that oocyte. After those gametes unite, which gametes, remember, are sperm and egg, after the gametes unite during fertilization, that secondary oocyte finishes meiosis II, and we have mentioned that previously, and it now becomes an ovum. Okay. Fertilization, again, is just the sperm plus the egg, okay, or the ovum, and you have now created a diploid cell. Okay, we call it a zygote. So previously, the individual sperm, the individual ovum, those were haploid cells. They only had one set of chromosomes each. So one set plus one set makes 2 sets. And that is what a diploid cell is. That is what a zygote is. It has 2 full sets of chromosomes, which is what you and I both have. All right, you can see what the hormones are doing throughout this whole process. So up top we've got LH and FSH. You can see LH and FSH are fairly stable until we get to ovulation. Okay, you can see this giant LH surge, so that's at day 14. Okay, you'll notice that estrogen and progesterone levels don't really start to increase until estrogen starts to increase right before ovulation and then tapers off a little bit. Progesterone levels don't really increase until about halfway through the secretory phase. Again, these two, the estrogens and the progesterones, are helping make sure the endometrium is ready for the fertilized egg to implant. Okay, and if no implantation occurs, then you'll see the estrogen levels go back down, and then the LH and the FSH, those levels would kind of repeat themselves, go back up, and then peak at day 14. And then we can compare that to what the endometrium is doing. So you can see the spike in the LH and the FSH leads to ovulation. Okay. You can also see the estrogen levels have basically peaked. Progesterone's not peaking until a little bit later. You can see how the estrogen and progesterone level increases are increasing the endometrial thickness and the vascularization.